All right. Thank you very much, Rita. I want to thank everyone as people file in. This is a collaboration between a number of chapters to make this happen. This was really kind of the first big thing that we're doing as a Northeast kind of region group of chapters. So the sponsors and the chapters that really kind of put the gumption behind this event are New Jersey, Central Jersey, Long Island, New York, Westchester, and we also had the Connecticut chapter, which was somewhat involved in this as well. And that collaboration is growing. So we're going to have more of these things coming up in the future, and you'll see them on Interact. If you're not on Interact, please get on that platform. There's a ton of information that gets shared on there, both professional information as well as events like this. The other plug I'm going to give you, and I'll share the registration, the website link in the chat, is we have our iDay coming up in October. Bryan will be a presenter at iDay. It will be a different topic than what he's going to be presenting on today, but it's going to be it'll be a 2-day event, and it is loaded with content. So definitely give it a look. I know we're semi up against Dallas's iDay right now, and Dallas has been killing it the last couple of days with their iDay too. So definitely something to check out. And like I said, I'll share the link in the chat. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote for this event. Bryan Falchuk is a speaker, a best-selling author, and a life coach. He overcame adversity, lost nearly 100 pounds, ran a marathon, and created an approach to help others live a better life every day. He learned the secret to overcoming any individual challenge and creating a life of achievement and happiness he can share at your next event. He's a best-selling author, acclaimed public speaker, a C-level executive. He's done multiple TEDx presentations, and he's been featured in many top publications like Inc. magazine, the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, and more. And with that, I'll turn the controls over to Bryan.
Thank you very much, Matt. And I should say there's a reason why I'm here with all of you in the CPCU Society is I'm also an insurance guy. So 20 years in P&C. I ran claims at Hiscox USA and then jumped to the InsurTech side before doing some of the things that I will be talking about at the iDay. I never know which shoulder, that shoulder. The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Evolution is my latest book, and that's what I'll be talking about at the iDay, but more on that to follow. So thank you, everyone, for having me today. I'm very excited. This is where my two worlds collide, my insurance world and my kind of life coaching, motivational work. So hopefully I can bring my two halves of my personality together. I'm going to share a presentation with you guys. This is based on one of the TED Talks that I did and my second book, which is called the 50, 75, 100 Solution. And I have to say, one of the nice things about doing it for an audience like this is normally when you have a lot of numbers in the title, normal human beings kind of cringe, but insurance people, right? Like underwriters, especially, and actuaries, and we're okay with numbers. So hopefully this is well received. The reality is there is no complex math in it. What it's about ultimately is about relationships. And what better place to talk about relationships than in a business that is at its core a relationship business, and that's insurance. Now, that's whether it's your relationship with distribution and the carrier or with the insured. It's all these external relationships, but lots of internal relationships too, within an agency, within a carrier, within a service provider, any other part of this huge ecosystem that is insurance that ultimately boils down to people. And I think right now, especially as most of us are separated from those people that we're in relationships with professionally, more ways to figure out how do we navigate some of those trickier moments, those tougher relationships that we really need to be better. When we can't just, let's go sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk through it. There's a screen between us now. So how do we navigate those moments to get those relationships from dysfunctional to productive and positive again? So that's what I want to share with you. It's something I call the 50, 75, 100 solution. And it's based on my own experience, my coaching work, and years of digging into this problem that ultimately culminated in this approach. So I hope this is valuable. But before we jump in, and I know everyone's camera's off and that's fine, but maybe just for yourselves, I want you to answer a simple question for me. And that's, do you have tough relationships? I did a TED Talk on this and I asked the audience, and I maybe got 5 or 6 hands out of like 120 people. And what I realized is there were a lot of couples in the audience. So wasn't totally surprised that people were afraid to put their hand up because maybe that tough relationship partner is the one sitting next to them. But the reality is we all have tough relationships, and they may not be wholly tough. Like they could be good and bad. We can argue with someone that we love, so we wouldn't necessarily call it a tough relationship, but of course there are tough moments in it. So the truth is every single person on this planet has relationships that are either completely or at some time in some way not quite as productive and positive and supportive and enriching and all these other great things that we wish they were. They're not those things all the time. So I think this is something that will apply to all of us. The question is why? Why are they tough? And typically we have the answer, and it's all these questions about the other person. So why are they doing this to me? Why won't they, just be nicer? Why won't they change? Why won't they respect me? Or, give me that chance, or listen to me, or hear me out? Or, why do they have this problem? Why are they so bad? It's all of these things about the problem the other person has. It's all these why questions, right? But the reality is maybe it's you or me or whoever the audience is for this. Is maybe you have a hand in this. And that doesn't have to mean that you're the problem. But whether you're the problem or not, you can still be the solution. And so that's a starting point. Is it's not about blame. It's not about who's at fault for those problems. It's about who's going to be the path forward. And that's what I want to share with you as a way to make that path forward. And sometimes you may hear I have a bad relationship with my microphone and I hit it. So I'm sorry if there's a boom sound. There's 3 principles that ultimately, through the work that I did in this question of how do we solve these tough relationships, 3 principles that came front and center that I found to be the building blocks of a path forward. And ultimately, they are the components that make up the 50, 75, 100 solution. And like a lot of brilliance in how we relate to people and things in our lives, they're founded in Buddhism. So I did not come up with these. I became a student of them. And in my own research, my own quest to solve some of the troubled relationships or difficult relationships I had, these are 3 things that I came across that really changed my thinking on the problem. And so I'm going to talk through them, and then we'll talk about how they get applied. So the 3 things are happiness seeking, interdependence, and impermanence. So what do these things mean? Well, happiness seeking is why we do what we do. So it's the notion that people go after things, behave in a certain way, do the things that they do for one reason and one reason only. And that's ultimately because we all seek to be happy. That doesn't mean that everything we do makes everyone around us happy, or that everything we do is good or nice or kind, but it's the ultimate reason why we're doing it. We may be confused about that happiness, or maybe confused about the right way to go about it, but ultimately it's because we want something better for ourselves. Now, sometimes that seeking of happiness comes at the benefit of someone else. So if I want to give back and I want to feel that, community involvement and that altruism, that not only makes me happier, but it helps the recipients of that giving back. If you mentor someone, if you care for someone, you usually feel good doing that. It warms your heart. You feel like you're doing good in the world. And of course, the person on the other end is made better for it. So sometimes our happiness seeking is mutually beneficial, but other times it isn't. And sometimes our happiness comes at the expense of the happiness of someone else. And I call this the last cookie problem, mainly because cookies are delicious, but also because it's an easy way to understand it. If there's one cookie left and you and I both want it, we can't both have it. So if I get my happiness, you don't. If you get yours, I don't. And, good kids would say, well, shouldn't we just share? Isn't that the right answer? Yeah, sharing is great. But if I want a cookie, if I want that whole cookie and I split it with you, I'm better than having nothing, but that's not really what I wanted. So neither of us is fully getting what we wished for. We get half of what we wanted and half hurt by someone else getting it. Even if we appreciate that they got a little something and that's nice, we didn't quite get what we were after. To put this into a more real world situation, cookies are very real, but we run into bigger problems in life. I was driving back from the airport in the Boston area. So I beat out the Rhode Island folks. I'm a little further north. I'm up outside of Boston. Coming back from Logan Airport, very typical Friday early evening in Boston, bumper to bumper traffic as people are commuting home from the weekend or maybe going up north to get away. And I got cut off by this white Ford Transit van with a big plumber logo and phone number and ad emblazoned on the side. And normally, what do we do when we get cut off in traffic? Maybe we yell, even though they can't hear us. We might put one of our fingers up at them. We try to cut them off back, like teach them a lesson. You're not getting in front of me. I'm getting in front of you. We might cause an accident, but we get riled up and we get angry, and we're angry at them for what they did to us. In this moment, I didn't do any of those things because of happiness seeking. So instead of seeing this guy's choices as being tied to me or directed solely at me, I looked at it another way. Because when he got on the highway that day, he didn't say, and I'm not going to do a Boston accent impersonation, but he wasn't like, "Where's that blue car? I got to get in front of that guy. That's what I want." He said the same thing I probably said, is, "I got to get where I'm going." And whether that's home or he's a plumber, maybe he's got a job to go to. That's all. And for whatever reason, he made a decision that getting one car further ahead would make him better off and make him happier. And I happen to be that car. So it wasn't directed at me, even though it put me further back. And the reality is not materially back. So who cares? But normally we do feel wronged and we get angry and we lash out and we act back at them. But I had nothing to do with the decision he made. It was about what he actually wanted deep down. And when I saw that, it allowed me not to get worked up. It allowed me not to make some bad choices in how I responded to him. And it also allowed me to see the bigger picture. So look, if this guy is going to get where he's going a little bit faster because he's in front of me, maybe will, maybe won't, but he thought so. Maybe it's not just about him getting home. I said he's a plumber. So maybe, someone's house is flooding. My house flooded. That's a big deal. Like maybe he's going to save the day. Maybe it was wintertime. Like maybe someone's boiler's broken and it's getting late at night. Maybe it's someone who there's a risk to their life because, it's going to be really cold that night. These are much bigger happiness kind of goals than just me not being one car further back. But I could only see that because instead of focusing on the why questions about what he did to me, I was able to see that, no, he wanted something and it just happened to come at my expense, but that's not why he did it. If someone's mean to you or someone's unkind to you or unfair or difficult to work with, again, as much as it may feel like it, they didn't wake up that morning and say, "Where's Bryan? I want to be mean to him today. I want to be rude to him today. I want to be difficult with him. I want to not play ball when we're negotiating." Even if they had that thought, it's not really about that. It's what they wanted as a result of that difficult interaction. Or maybe, and this goes to some more extreme situations where someone, maybe suffered from trauma as a child. And so for them, it's not even about something they're consciously aware of. It's about feelings of power. And they have moments of feeling better when they put someone else down because they're so down on themselves to begin with. So if they can belittle you and have control or power over you, they feel better, even if only momentarily, even if it costs them something else. It's a cut off your nose to spite your face kind of moment. But they feel that surge of power and they feel better. And that's why I said before, sometimes it's confusion over what would make you happier. And it doesn't make their behavior right. It doesn't make how they're treating you right or just or okay. It doesn't mean you have to suffer it, but it at least helps you understand this isn't just some blind vendetta against me. There's something they want. And I happen to be, in their eyes, standing in the way. So happiness seeking is a way to shift your perspective, which then opens you up to change your behaviors. The second point, interdependence. This is the notion that none of us is a certain way in and of ourselves all the time in all situations. We are good and bad, happy, sad, nice, mean, whatever, in different situations with different people. The way that we are is dependent on who we're interacting with and the context around it. That's why, you have these knockdown, drag out fights with your spouse or your parents or your children or your loved ones or whoever that you care deeply about, your best friends. You won't talk for 2 weeks. And then, a year later, it's like nothing ever happened. Different situations, even with the same people, can lead to different kinds of interactions. That's why bullies still have friends. That's why you can ask someone out on a date and they say no, but you ask someone else out, they say yes. It's not that you're undateable, period, point blank. It's with that person that wasn't a fit. So interdependence is the notion that if we change something about the situation, we can get a different outcome. And that's where happiness seeking has its mechanism to make change. Because if we change the way that we're looking at the situation, we change the way that we're going to respond to it because we have a different perspective. Interdependence is the mechanism that change of perspective and behavior starts to affect a change in the total situation. And the last point, impermanence, is really a form of hope. So impermanence is the age-old adage that the only constant is change, right? Everything changes. Even people who seem like they're always stubborn or mean or whatever, they're not actually always that way. Remember, they were a child at one point or a baby at one point. They grow older. They have different experiences, different perspectives on things. Even, their hair changes. Everything changes, even if it's only minor. The context around us changes. And so what that means is instead of looking at a situation as hopeless because they're never going to do that thing you wish they did, or they're never going to treat you differently, it reminds you, look, everything changes. If we can change the situation, something else can change as well. So it's a good reminder that there's hope and it's worth putting the effort in to get a different outcome. Those are the three building blocks: happiness seeking, interdependence, and impermanence behind 50, 75, 100. And now for all the underwriters on the presentation or actuaries, here's the fun part, the math. This is where the numbers come together so you can start to see how do you go from those three building blocks to the actual way that this starts to play out. So I'm going to break the numbers down for you. And the first one's pretty straightforward, the 50. This is the notion that in any two-sided relationship, there's two sides, there's two halves, right? Whether it's two people, you versus them, or two groups, our group versus your group, it's 50-50. It's you and it's them. The thing is, it's not really 50-50. And this is how we're going to build to the 75. So how do we get that extra 25%? Well, it turns out we're also split in half. So we have half of us that's our actions. So what we're proactively, independently choosing to put out in the world, irrespective of whatever else is going on, what we choose to wear, how we're feeling that day, the way that we're talking or not talking to people, whether they do anything or not. It's just what we're choosing to do. The other half of us is our reactions. So that's based on the stimulus we're taking in from the outside world. It's how we're responding. It's how I was in response to that guy who cut me off. It's how you might be when you're about to reach for that cookie and someone else grabs the last one, or someone says something to you that you wish they didn't say or that offends you. Now, the thing with reactions is they're a choice. And for some people, that sounds offensive or silly, right? Like if someone says something mean to you, what do you mean? It's a choice for me not to be offended, or it's a choice for me not to hit back or to try to defend myself. I have to do that. Well, that's a way to see it. But the reality is you can still walk away, say something kind, do something different, turn the other cheek. There are a number of things you can do. And each of those is up to you to decide. It doesn't mean any of them is easy. It doesn't mean you don't have emotion that plays into some of those decisions, but they are still your choice. You have that freedom over yourself and how you react. So we have our 50% made up of our actions and reactions. And this is where we start to get to the extra 25% to get us to 75. That same split is going on in the other side. So that other person has their actions, what they're proactively choosing to do in the world, and their reactions. Only their reactions are a response to you, which means where you might have felt helpless and hopeless before, I can't change them. Why are they doing this? They'll never listen to me. When you realize that their reactions are based on what you're putting out into the world, it suddenly makes you feel not powerless or controlless, but like you have some agency and some influence over the situation, because what you put out, whether they want to or not, is going to start to lead to different responses in them because they're just reacting to you. So we move from just being at 50%, us against them, to 75%. That means 3/4 of that relationship is either directly under your control. That's your half. You got to own that. Or that extra 25%. So 3/4 of it is under your control or under your influence, you have agency to move 3/4 of that relationship. And when you can do that to 3/4 of any problem, you start to move it towards 100% better. And this 100% idea doesn't mean everything turns into flowers and unicorns and happiness. It doesn't mean if you are applying this in a difficult marriage that you stave off divorce. Sometimes divorce is the better answer. Sometimes leaving that job that's difficult, or not working with a given broker or a given underwriter or carrier again, is the right answer. So 100% doesn't mean everything's happy and copacetic and everybody gets along great and works together as best friends. But it means what you do going forward is a better answer for both of you. And the way that you leave that situation is more positive. This is where that notion of conscious uncoupling comes from. It's like, look, we're not best if we stay together, but the way we come apart can still be better for everybody. So it's a mature, open, positive way to recognize that, yeah, there may be some things that are impassable here, but we can still figure out a path forward together and be professional and better the business or whatever you're trying to do together, even if you can't be best friends. So it's very easy to talk about this stuff in theory. That traffic example actually was real. And it happened like 2 weeks before I gave this presentation. So it was perfect timing. But I had another situation brewing that was a lot more extreme. And it's a story I like to share, partially because it happened in insurance and partially because it was really extreme, really real. And the 100 wasn't, let's hold hands and skip off together. I was in a role at a carrier, it was part of the C-suite, and I was very close to one of my peers who was brilliant, really well respected, and actually happened to be my predecessor in my role before taking a different role. She was also an ex-litigator, so she was a brilliant arguer, for lack of a better word. She could win any argument, whether she was right or wrong, didn't matter. She knew how to go about it, and she was really effective at it. And one day, we went from being really good friends to suddenly she was attacking me quite a bit, and I didn't really know why. I came to find out why later, but in the moment, I was very confused by it and really put off. And I'd seen her do this to one of our peers and didn't really understand it, but I was the new guy on the team. So maybe, they had some past bad blood. And so, it's just the way it is. Maybe they just didn't get along. But one Friday evening, like 5 o'clock, she sent an email to me and to our boss, the CEO, and CC'd the CFO. And it was a bullet list of probably about 12 or 15 facts or points of data proving that I was incompetent and needed to be fired immediately and was ruining the business. Wow. And this was a pretty shocking Friday evening surprise. It's like, well, there goes my weekend. A lot of us have gotten attacked at work, whether internally or externally. And a lot of us have gotten unhappy or unfriendly or unkind emails late at night or, at the end of the day. And it ruins our weekend for sure. It ruins our night. But often we tend to respond, like cutting that driver back off who just cut you off in traffic. You feel attacked and you attack back, and it's understandable. And for me, looking at her email, aside from feeling attacked and offended and frankly scared for my employment, because here's this brilliant person who everyone respects, who really knows her stuff, who's coming after me, and she is painting a really strong picture. All of the stats that she quoted and the facts that she laid out were wrong. And that's not just me being like, well, she came after me, so of course I think what she's saying wrong. This isn't like a political battle where both sides are spewing facts and somehow each one is wrong and the other one's right. These were just hard numbers in our finances and in our reserving and our claims development. So there were actual truths, non-subjective truths out there. And that's not what she was quoting. She was bringing up numbers. I had no idea where they were from. But luckily, the CFO was on that email chain, and he's the owner of the truth of anything financial. And he had the same numbers I did. So I knew at its core, this is wrong. And the numbers that I had were right. So maybe I just send an email back and say, nope, you're wrong on all these counts. Here's the actual numbers. Why don't you stop it? Or probably something less friendly than that. The problem is, like I said, she was a litigator. She knows how to argue, whether she has the facts or not. And she had a really winning record. And I'd seen her do this to one of our peers. Even when I thought that he was right, she took him down pretty hard. So I was like, I don't know that I can go up against her, even if the facts are on my side. So I don't know if that's going to win. So maybe I just try to defame her and go after other things, sort of ignore what's going on here. Look at all these bad things over here. But our CEO, our boss was watching. That wouldn't look so great for me. And frankly, she's probably expecting that and she'll come back with something else. So again, I'm not going to be able to win that argument. So I felt really backed into a corner. If I go with the facts, she's probably ready for that and she'll tear me apart. And if I just try to go after her character or something else, she'll just tear me apart that way. And she tends to win. So what am I supposed to do? And that's where 50, 75, 100 came in. What I recognized is she didn't just say like, oh, it'd be fun let me get Bryan fired this weekend. That sounds like a good idea. There's something she wants and she's not saying it in there. And it's not as simple as me losing my job. And I don't know what it is. So I better not just lash out because that's not going to win. There's a third path and I need to figure out what that happiness is that she's seeking. And I will not say this was easy. This was one of these moments where it's like, I had this theory, I had this idea. Here's where the rubber meets the road, and see if I'm more than just a fair weather fan. Can I really do this at, what is probably the most critical moment in my career so far? So I wrote an email back. So everyone, and I started with 2 words I know she was not expecting, and they were thank you. She definitely was not expecting me to thank her for that email. And I didn't want to get into any of the bullet points because arguing back and forth over email over the weekend with our CEO watching probably was, whether I won or not, that's not going to look great. That's not going to paint me as a responsible, controlled, mature executive who can be trusted with, tens of millions of dollars in budget or indemnity or whatever. So I said, thank you. And I just noted that we stand in different positions on this. So I just said, I have a different take on the data you listed below, but I didn't want to get into that. So I said, putting that aside, the risk that you're talking about for the business is very concerning, because it is. And I said, why don't I find us time to all talk this week? So instead of engaging and starting to fight back, I just made space for us to talk because I knew we needed to get to what she actually cared about. And I gave some space to this notion that the business is in trouble. Now, she's saying it's in trouble because of me, but whatever the cause, the idea that the business is in trouble is a mutual happiness we can all seek, making that business better, right? So that takes me from being a blocker to maybe standing out of the way a bit. And hopefully that allows her to see like, oh, Bryan's not the threat. Bryan's not the blocker. Maybe there's a path ahead. Maybe that's a way to start eliciting a different reaction out of her by giving her a version of myself that says, thank you. Let's dig into what you care about instead of, no, you're wrong, or, well, you stink too. So we got in a meeting and I started with thank you for the email and for raising those concerns. They're pretty serious. We definitely need to work through them. What is it you're hoping to achieve? And, she said something to the effect of, I think you're putting the business at risk and that can't happen anymore. So we need to fix that issue, which is a euphemism for we need to get rid of you. And so I said, okay, well, why don't you go through some of the points that you shared in your email so we can understand them better? And this is myself and her, our CEO and our CFO. And, I had, because she sent her email, I had all of my responses, like I had all the data versus the data that she had. So if it got down to the nitty gritty of you said it's X, I'm saying it's Y, I had that. And the CFO had the same thing and our numbers aligned. So I knew if it really came down to data, I had some credibility to stand on. But how it would all play out was a different story. So, I stepped aside and I let her talk. And I have a heart rate monitor on my watch. I didn't get worked up while she was talking. I wasn't just biting my lip waiting to be able to jump in and counter anything she said. My heart rate stayed really stable and pretty low because I just kept thinking, she needs to sound off about this because she's worked up about something that she's not fully exposed yet. She needs to talk through these points to then talk about what it is she actually cares about. And that's what I care about. That's what I want to get to. So I needed to stay calm, let her speak, and wait to hear what it was she truly wanted. And yeah, I was gambling a little bit that she wouldn't say openly in this meeting, like, what do I want? I want you to get fired. Like, that's probably not something she would just outright say, even if that's what she's hinting at. So she went through her bullet list, and it was very heated. She was really impassioned about it. And when she finished, I said, thank you again. She was not expecting that, which I watched our CEO's eyes. It kind of lit up when I said that. He wasn't expecting that either. But then I said, these are really serious things. As I mentioned, I have a different view of the data. And I said, the CFO I know also has a different view of it. So I don't know which facts are right or wrong. And we probably don't have enough time to pick that apart. But what I do know is the impact on the business you're talking about is a serious issue. And we do need to figure that out. What would be the best outcome in your eyes? What is it you really want? I was asking her to define that happiness. And she shared something about the impact on the book of business and turning the results around through some changes in some of the underwriting practices, some of the reserving practices, but ultimately putting the book back in a better path, which is pretty hard to argue with. Why wouldn't we want the business to perform better? That's happiness we can all get around. So pretty surprisingly, I thanked her again because I was kind of saying thank you every few minutes at this point. But I didn't fight her at all, because why would I? It's a sensible thing that I probably wouldn't have seen the sense in if I was still in defense and argue mode. So because I allowed myself to stay calm and seek out her happiness and understand it, I could appreciate it for what it was, just like I could with that plumber. And it allowed me to, instead of fighting, say, yeah, that sounds really reasonable. I had a few thoughts on things that I could do to help. And so I laid those out. And then I kicked it back to her and said, what do you think? And all of a sudden, I went from being a blocker to someone who was merely just standing out of her way to someone who was extending a hand to try to help her get that cookie she wanted. So I won't say it all worked out beautifully from our relationship standpoint. We went from, having dinner together whenever we were in town at the same time. We both worked in different cities, to not doing that, but being able to work together on things, even one-on-one, not just when all of our other peers were around. We were productive. So I think that's a huge improvement from a place of getting me fired. It's not that the divorce didn't come, but how it came was better. Now, it turns out the whole reason this happened, and this got exposed later, was she had actually made some pretty grave mistakes that set in action some problems in the book that were starting to come out. And me being in my role, I naturally came across them, and I didn't have any clue of this. So as I'm reporting my results and things that I'm seeing, it's basically starting to paint a picture of the missteps she had made. So that's why she suddenly saw me as a threat and a problem, because I was exposing mistakes that she had made that she was trying to fix and cover up before anybody found out. She ended up leaving. And I wish that she had looked at her peers, myself and this other guy included, because he was also exposing things unknowingly. That's why she attacked him. We could have helped her. And I wish that in those early moments, we had all been able to see happiness seeking, because we might have spotted her need for help and been able to extend it, even if she wasn't ready for it yet, just by giving her a different version of ourselves to interact with. I think that's really, really critical. So I'm going to close up with a quote from Buddha, because we got to come full circle on this Buddhism idea. But I will say, questions, comments, discussions, please do use the chat. I know when we come back together and we can see each other, and I'd love to hear from people and hear what are your thoughts, situations you faced, things where you've seen this work or not, or where you think it might be difficult. I want to get a dialogue going on the notion. But a bit of a quote. So Buddha said this 2,500 years ago. And I think it's just as important today, just as true today. It's still hard for a lot of us, but when you pause and reflect on the truth of it, and you come back to that basic idea that we all just want to be happy, how can we appeal to that, recognizing the connection we have, we can start to change the dynamic in any difficult relationship, even if it's extreme. So we conquer anger with non-anger, badness with goodness, meanness with generosity, and dishonesty with truth. It's really that notion that you don't fight fire with fire. This is water squelches flames. So we'll come back together in just a second. Just as a call out to the I-Day on October 16th, I'll be presenting really the key takeaways from my book, The Future of Insurance, From Disruption to Evolution. It goes into 7 case studies of carriers who have innovated and evolved in the face of a lot of disruptive threats and a change in customer expectations, really becoming demands for a different way of interacting and providing a different customer experience. So it's a rich book with a lot of learnings, and I will be sharing the key takeaways as well as some overviews of the cases. If you're interested in checking it out ahead of time and having some more background before the I-Day, you can pick it up at future-of-insurance.com. It's also on Amazon and Audible and Apple Books and Nook and Barnes and Noble and where else? Google Play Books. So you can get in whatever format you like, and all that's linked up at futureofinsurance.com. And I should say, please do reach out, follow me. I'm at Bryan Falchuk everywhere, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with other professionals in our industry. So that is it from me. I'd love to open this up, maybe questions and comments and thoughts from everybody. Let's see if anything's in the comments.
Please use the chat feature to type your comments or your questions. Matt and I are monitoring that.
So while people formulate, Bryan, a quick question to you would be, just like Reader's Digest version, what really kind of got you to this point, this kind of way of thinking? I know the journey may have been long. There might not have been, one aha moment, but really, what really kind of pointed you in this direction?
Yeah. So I don't have approval from my wife to say this, but it's in the book. She just hasn't read the book and won't read it. So I'm as safe as, because I know she's not logged into this, but it was my marriage. And I'm being totally honest about that. Like a lot of marriages, things get tough. And mine, my first book that predates this one is about our struggle.
For a point of levity and not to minimize what you talked about, but there are a lot of like songs that I would think of that kind of speak to certain things like that, right? So the first thing that came to mind was Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville, right? And he's talking about how he's basically trying to pass the blame, right? And then at the end, he's like, it could be my fault. Like, it's like, you look at the other person on the other side and you're like, well, everything I do, it's like a negative. But sometimes you have to look internally, right? For a little more levity, if anyone's heard of him, there's a singing comedian called Stephen Lynch. And there is a song, and I will censor the song, but the name is basically a curse word for someone who is not nice. And at the end, there is the complete denial where the person asks themselves whether or not they are the problem. And they're like, nah, couldn't be. It's everyone else who sucks.
The entire world has gone mad, just not you.
Yeah. No, you're the only rational one. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Matt, I want to give respect to one of the questions that came in from Tracy. Tracy, if your camera's on, you can wave. There you go. Yes, Pokeball. So Tracy, your point is 100% spot on. That the part where we said this is awesome, that's like, you got it. No, but the point about how much easier said than done this is, and you were absolutely right. And that was a sort of like do or die moment that I faced, where I recognized like, well, this isn't easy not doing it. And that's something that's hard for us a lot of times to see when we're in the midst of something difficult and we see an alternative that feels painful, or we're afraid of trying it. It's even nice things like someone gives you a shortcut. The first time you use that shortcut, driving directions, it probably seems longer just because it's unfamiliar. When we have a problem employee, a lot of managers will put up with the problem way after they know they shouldn't, because they think about all the pain of, well, if that person's not here, who's going to pick up the slack? And they know this, and they know. And inevitably and invariably, when that person's gone, people are like, oh, A, we didn't realize how much easier it would be without them than we thought it would be. And B, they made things so much worse than we ever saw. You always feel the pain of the change more than the pain of continuing on because you've been surviving it. And so that's where, yeah, it's easier said than done. And in some situations, there's danger. And so, like when I did the TED Talk, this isn't in that video, but I gave a disclaimer and I give one in the book. This is not for 100% of situations. There are times where your life is in jeopardy, where there's genuine mental illness, where there's addiction, where there's physical violence. Don't sit here and say thank you and not you need to get yourself to safety. You need to not enable that behavior. So this isn't, sit there and take a lashing from someone. There are times where it's inappropriate, and I'm all for getting the right and proper help. But when we're talking about a professional setting, well, if any of that's happening professionally, get a different job, no question, or fire the person. But these are situations where we should be able to try to interact differently. And I know I used to be at a carrier called Beasley before going to Hiscox. There was a broker that hated us with a passion, and we hated him. I didn't actually know him, but like everyone in the company knew his name. Everyone hated him, and he hated all of us. And then I went to Hiscox, and he was one of our top brokers, and I got to meet him on the annual retreat with the 50 top performing brokers. And he's eccentric. We all know that phrase. Like that's another way of saying maybe not the nicest. But you know what? Actually, it was fine and like his wife and his 4 kids were there, and like they were great. When you got past the facade and you actually just talked through it, he had a reason for feeling the way he did about Beasley. He was wronged by them. And I don't agree with him taking it that way, but he did. He wasn't happiness seeking. He felt wronged and he held a grudge. But when I heard him out and I got over that anger around it, I was like, oh, you know what? I don't agree, but I get it. And now I can see him for what he's actually about, and I can hear what he actually cares about. And as much as I don't agree with his response, I understand why he felt wronged enough to take it out on them. Like, yeah, there's a values threat in that. And that's an important thing to people. But you can't see that if you get stuck in this, like, that guy's a jerk, we'll never work with him again. He's weird. He says things that you wish he didn't say, but there's a reason behind it. You just have to make space to be able to see that. And Tracy, you're right. Like that takes real effort. So to be fair, so did working with him the way we did at Beasley. Like that wasn't easy either. Can you use a trusted person to help you stay on track? That's Michael, that's a great point. And absolutely. And that's exactly what I did with the CFO in that particular situation is our data came from the same place. The other person is the COO. Her data came from herself. She was making it up. So I knew I could look in the finance system, see the numbers and be like, okay, CFO is going to have the same view I do. So let me reach out to him and not tell him anything. Just say, hey, you saw that email. That's not what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? And he's like, no, those numbers are not right at all. And he listed all, and I was like, that's all the numbers I have. So, okay, we're on the same page. We talked before the meeting and I was like, look, I don't want to go to war with her. I don't want to battle over the stats. But if we do, I need help. I need to know that there's an impartial third party who is technically the owner of the right answer, that you'd be willing to stand up. And he was, because he also cared about the business. But, that took work. I would love to have said the CEO was a trusted person I could turn to. We had a great relationship, very close, but he had to be impartial there. And I know she was going to him behind the scenes. I didn't want to play that game. I knew ultimately where the right answer stood. And I knew that if I used the right approach, the right outcome would come out. And I had someone very credible and reputable that was going to have my back. So going to our boss behind the scenes probably wasn't the right answer. And to his credit, right after the meeting, he called me and he was like, how did you do that? I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you didn't get worked up. I would have been screaming at her. I was like, yeah, well, that wouldn't have gone so well. And you wouldn't have thought too well of me either. He's like, yeah, probably not. It's like, okay. So I'm glad I chose the way that I chose, and recognizing while the CEO and I trust each other and we had a strong relationship, it would have been inappropriate to turn to him to ultimately go to where we needed to go. The takeaway and first, the importance of getting one's ego out of the way 100%. That's Rita who brought that up. You're absolutely right, Rita. instead of being about me, it's finding out what's important to the other person. Yeah, that's part of what makes it so hard.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. There's that's this whole mask debate, and I don't want to get into the politics and science of that, but it's ultimately about me versus you in every one of those really heated, kind of nasty headbuttings that we read about in the press. Um, and the funny thing is the mask is actually about the other person. It's not about yourself. And I think that's part of what makes it so hard in our society, especially, is people only feel a threat to themselves and the benefit's not actually for them. So it's like a very self-centered kind of societal view makes that whole issue really, really difficult in this country. Tracy said there's a 12-year-old bully inside all of us who doesn't possess the emotional maturity to thoughtfully respond instead of viscerally reacting. That is brilliantly said. But if you're intentional about the people in your circle, the things you read, the words you use, etc., it becomes part of your DNA to be a better person. Yeah, that's perfect. I punched a 12-year-old bully in the nose when I was 8. That struck me the other day, and that's not me at all. My brother was egging me on to do it.
But I bet the bully stopped bullying you after that.
He actually, he came around trying to play every day, and I really wasn't interested, partially because I still felt so bad about what I had done. But so my bully might be 8 years old, actually, but I didn't know it at the time. But that's a great point. Living with intention is a huge deal, Tracy. Good point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm curious. Other thoughts, other reactions. Maybe people have faced similar situations.
And if you don't want to type them, feel free to unmute yourself.
Rita, you don't have to tell me twice. I always like to talk.
And I count on you.
No, the thought I just wanted to share is that the idea that in a professional setting, it becomes even more important to master this because, I think you made the point earlier, Bryan, that, you have to behave appropriately. You have to move in a way that kind of protects your professional brand.
Yeah.
It can become exhausting at times because it's, as my mom would say, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
And if you know what the right thing is to do, if you know what the right thing is to do, I don't want to say this. It becomes exhausting to always have to be the good person, to always be the person who's thinking, strategically about like, okay, I could punch this person or I could do something crazy, or I could take a beat and figure out what is it that I want to get out of this exchange and what is the best way for me to get that while preserving my professional brand. And it, again, is exhausting, but it is necessary.
Yeah. I think you're right that it's exhausting, and I think that's ultimately that changes over the long term. So this becomes second nature the more you do, like anything. The more you do this, the more you build the right kind of wiring in your brain and your reactions, the easier it is to call upon it. And the more natural that becomes your default response. So the effort comes down, and as you do it more, you start to reap the rewards of it. And if you don't, you may be in the wrong place. And so that's why I always say the most important thing about any job is the culture of the place. And it's a really hard thing to test for because every single company talks about how great their culture is and non-hierarchical and meritocracy and all these other nice words and employee engagement. It's a hard thing to sniff out. But there are some places where that's just not the way it is. And if that's the way you are striving to be, then that's probably not a fit. But if you're able to do this on a regular basis, you should see the fruits of that. I mean, there's a reason why I survived that year and the attacker didn't. And our other peer who was being attacked, he stuck around too. So, it's hard. That was a really, tough week or so, and things were uncomfortable going forward, but it was clearly the better path. And that was my MO certainly going forward. And it did work out really well for me. And it just got a lot easier. And I think the heart rate point, the reason why I bring that up is interesting because you don't expect that. Like you expect, like that, like gritting your teeth and kind of faking it. And like you're bright, or like I'd match my shirt. The fact that I was able to do that and had the data to show that I was actually okay, I wasn't just faking it, I was genuinely calm, that means the work was not as hard as I thought it would be when I first received her email. And I was like, what do I do? It gets a lot easier with time, and you build the right people around you.
So, Bryan, there was a comment from Alicia. Want to know the culture? Ask former employees directly, and Tracy kind of echoed that. I have like an anecdote for that. I'm pretty sure you probably have something for it too. I worked at a former employer that would review Glassdoor, and every single negative review, they would try and undercut the review defensively to say, "Oh, well, this person did this or this person did that." All the while, in the back of my brain, I'm thinking, you're not learning anything, right? Like you're discounting someone's perspective, and whether or not the data might be true or not, like perspective is reality sometimes, right?
Yeah. And Alicia's saying, be careful with Glassdoor. Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's any online reviews are tricky because you don't know, is it just the extreme cases? Was there a cease and desist order behind some of the things that aren't there? We never know. But Matt, you're spot on. It's really easy to be like, oh, that person's just bitter. Oh, they were a terrible wall. We fired them. Honestly, that's the political discourse in the country right now. If anyone raises anything of concern, the response is to discredit them instead of saying, I may not agree with them, but there's always something to what people are saying. If you have a customer, I ran claims, like you'd get people who were angry, right? Even if it's like, oh, they're just trying to commit fraud. They're trying to juice the value of their claim. Okay, they might be, but there's still something to learn potentially from their points about your customer service and their points about your tone or your responsiveness. It doesn't mean that they didn't commit fraud or that they're right, but there's still a lesson in that. So you have to listen, whether it's good or it's bad, or it's pro or con you still need to listen because there could be something in there. And at the end of the day, like, they don't need to grow or not grow. You do. So in every one of these moments and every piece of this feedback is an opportunity for you to become a bigger and better person. It has nothing to do with the other person. Like controlling your reactions, getting them to respond differently, like that's great, but it's ultimately about your life. Because having better relationships, it's altruistic and kind for that person to not have that angst. But do you want to live a life where all your relationships are hard and where you fight with everyone? It seems like some people want to, but it's really about us. And it's interesting, like the overarching purpose behind Buddhism is to reduce suffering for others, which is as altruistic as you can get. A lot of debate then comes in because if you reduce the suffering of others, invariably you feel better. You feel fulfilled, you feel kinder. So are you really reducing it for others, or is it that about, yourself ultimately? Well, A, it doesn't matter, but B, you end up having a much more fulfilled and better life and life experience when you're taking away the conflict and the pain of those around you. So, just because they're saying something nasty about you, what can you learn about it and how can you serve them better, even if they're doing bad things? Because it's going to make your life better. And so there's a selfish take on any of that.
So we're right up against our promise deadline. Rita, do you want to say a couple of closing thoughts? I think some of us will stick around for a couple of minutes if there's some more comments and things like that, if folks want to share. But just if you would wrap us up really quick, Rita.
Sure. So before I actually wrap us up, I'd like to take a screenshot. So if you'd like to be in the screenshot, please turn your webcams on. Yes, Tracy, as you fluffing your hair. Please turn Matt, good job. And while we're turning on our webcams, I want to acknowledge Florida and Nebraska who typed in the chat. They're in the house. Okay. Mike, all the way from Florida. And you're going to be on in an hour, Mike. My goodness, I'll be in your session with Dallas. Okay, so it looks like we've got the cams on. I'll give it another few seconds. And to let you know, I will be sending a survey link. And since we are recording this, I will share a link to the recording as well. As Bryan mentioned, our I-Day is October 15th and 16th. And Bryan will be speaking on October 16th. And after today, Bryan, I can't wait to hear you again. This is absolutely great. And our I-Day is virtual. And Matt posted our website, njcpcuiday.com, in the chat. And so, okay, looks like we've got everybody who's going to be in the screenshot. So smile and wave, and I'll tell you when it's finished. Okay, great. So thank you, Bryan. Again, wonderful presentation, great takeaways. Thank you, everyone, for participating around the country, and we'll be sending information out to you with the survey and with a link to the presentation.
Thank you all so much.